They say secrets have a way of tearing people apart. But what happens when those secrets bring people dangerously close? I didn't know how much one decision could change everything until that night. A night I'll never forget. My dad, a successful lawyer, has always been my rock. After my parents' messy divorce, he worked hard to give me stability. His best friend, Tom, was like family to us, always around, always dependable. My dad trusted him with everything, even with me. That's how I found myself spending the night at Tom's place one rainy Friday evening when my dad had to leave town unexpectedly. Tom's house was quiet, almost too quiet. It was nothing like my dad's bustling apartment or even my mom's chaotic home. He lived alone in a small but stylish condo filled with sleek furniture and minimalist decor. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease when I stepped inside, but I chalked it up to nerves. After all, Tom had always been nice to me. What could possibly go wrong? As the night went on, Tom made sure I felt comfortable. He ordered pizza, put on a movie, and even shared stories about my dad from their college days. His laughter was contagious, and for a moment I felt at ease. It wasn't until the second glass of wine he poured for himself that things started to shift. "You've grown up so much," he said, his eyes lingering a little too long. I brushed off the comment with an awkward laugh, but something about his tone made my skin prickle. He leaned back on the couch, his gaze fixed on me as if he was seeing me for the first time. "I'm just your dad's kid," I said, trying to deflect the attention, but he didn't laugh this time. Instead, his expression darkened, something forbidden flickering in his eyes. "That's not all you are," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. The air grew thick, heavy with tension I couldn't ignore. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, pretending to focus on the movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. "Relax," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I'm just saying you're not a kid anymore." I didn't know what to say. Was I imagining things? Overthinking his words? But then he moved closer. So close I could feel the warmth of his body beside mine. "You're beautiful, you know that?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded in my chest, the warning bells in my head screaming louder with every word. This wasn't the Tom I knew. This was someone else, someone dangerous. And yet I couldn't move. The silence between us felt unbearable, the hum of the television barely masking the sound of my racing heartbeat. I forced myself to look away from him, hoping to break the intensity of the moment. But then I felt his hand, light, almost hesitant, resting on my arm. "You seem tense," Tom said, his voice softer now, almost soothing. "You don't have to be." I shifted uncomfortably, pulling my arm back as casually as I could. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a tight smile. "Just tired, I guess." "Maybe I should pour you a drink," he suggested, already standing up and walking toward the kitchen. Before I could protest, he returned with a glass of wine. He set it in front of me, his eyes lingering for just a second too long. "I'm good with water," I said quickly, sliding the glass away. I hoped he'd take the hint, but his smile told me he wasn't done yet. "You know, you remind me so much of your dad," Tom said, settling back into his seat. "But there's something different about you. Something more." The words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't fully process why. I tried to laugh it off, desperate to keep things light. "Well, he and I don't have much in common," I said, hoping to steer the conversation elsewhere. Tom didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. "No, you don't," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You're unique." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The atmosphere had shifted again, and this time, it felt darker. "I think I'll head to bed," I said, standing up abruptly. "It's getting late." Tom stood up too, blocking my path for just a moment before stepping aside. "Of course," he said, his smile returning. "The guest room's ready for you. If you need anything at all, just call me." I nodded and quickly made my way upstairs, the sound of his voice echoing in my ears. As I closed the door to the guest room, I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled as I locked the door, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone, desperate for a distraction. But every notification, every flicker of the screen felt hollow. My mind kept circling back to Tom, his words, his tone, the way his eyes had lingered. The house was quiet now, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak, every whisper of the wind outside. I told myself I was safe, that I was overreacting, but the unease refused to fade. And then I heard it, a soft knock at the door. "Everything okay in there?" Tom's voice called out, muffled but unmistakable. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Yeah," I managed to reply, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine." There was a pause, a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. "All right," he said finally, his footsteps retreating down the hall. I exhaled slowly, but the relief was short-lived. I knew something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew the night wasn't over yet. The stillness of the house was unnerving, each minute stretching longer than the last. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, willing myself to sleep, but it wouldn't come. My heart hadn't stopped its frantic pace since Tom's knock at the door. Something was off, terribly off. Just when I thought the night might settle into uneasy quiet, I heard the creak of footsteps outside the door. They were slow and deliberate, stopping right outside my room. My body stiffened, and I clenched the blanket tighter around me. "Are you sure you're okay?" Tom's voice came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. I didn't answer immediately, debating whether to pretend I was asleep. But the silence dragged on, and I didn't want him to open the door. "I'm fine," I said quickly, keeping my voice calm. "Just tired." The pause that followed felt eternal. Then, finally, I heard the sound of his footsteps retreating again. My shoulders slumped with relief, but I knew I wouldn't sleep that night. I checked the time on my phone. It was past midnight. The minutes crawled by as I tried to distract myself with social media, but even that wasn't working. The tension in the house was suffocating, and I felt trapped. And then, I heard the sound of the doorknob. It turned slightly, as though someone was testing the lock. My breath caught, and I froze, staring at the door in disbelief. "Tom!" I called out, my voice shaky but firm. There was no response. I waited, heart pounding, but the doorknob didn't move again. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, but deep down I knew better. I grabbed my phone and opened a chat with my dad. Typing out a message felt like a lifeline, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That his best friend was acting strange? That I felt unsafe? It all sounded ridiculous in my head. Before I could finish typing, I heard another sound, this time from downstairs. It was faint but distinct, like the clink of a bottle. Gathering my courage, I crept to the door and pressed my ear against it. The house was quiet again, but that only made the dread worse. I sat back on the bed, debating whether to call my dad or wait it out until morning. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, but where would I go? I didn't have a car, and walking alone in the middle of the night wasn't an option. As I wrestled with my thoughts, I heard footsteps again. They were heavier now, deliberate and growing louder. My heart raced as they stopped outside the door. This time, Tom didn't knock. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, almost pleading. I didn't answer, clutching my phone tightly, ready to call someone, anyone, if he tried to come in. "It's important," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stayed silent, hoping he'd give up and go away. After a long pause, I heard his footsteps retreat. But something told me this wasn't the end. The minutes dragged on, and I stayed frozen on the edge of the bed, gripping my phone as if it could somehow shield me from the unease that engulfed the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound, felt magnified in the oppressive silence. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I knew I couldn't stay like this all night, paralyzed with fear. I needed a plan. But before I could figure out what to do, I heard the footsteps again. They were closer this time, deliberate, heading toward my door. "Listen," Tom said, his voice low but firm. "I think we got off on the wrong foot tonight. Can we just talk?" My hands shook as I stared at the door. "It's late, Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to sleep. We can talk in the morning." Another pause. The tension was unbearable. "All right," he finally said. But instead of walking away, I heard the sound of something scraping lightly against the door. My stomach twisted as I realized he was still standing there, lingering. "Tom," I called out, this time more assertive. "Please go back downstairs." Silence. And then a low sigh. "You don't have to be so distant," he said, his tone softer now, almost coaxing. "I just want to make sure you're comfortable. That you're okay." I clenched my jaw, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I'm fine," I said sharply, hoping to put an end to whatever this was. Finally, I heard his footsteps retreat, but my relief was short-lived. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd be back. I knew I couldn't stay locked in this room all night. My mind raced with options, none of them good. I thought about calling my dad, but the idea of explaining this over the phone felt overwhelming. I glanced at the window, wondering if climbing out was an option, but the drop looked too far. And then I heard it, the faint creak of the stairs. He was coming back. My heart hammered in my chest as the footsteps grew louder, closer. This time, they didn't stop outside the door. Instead, I heard the sound of something scraping against the lock. Panic surged through me as I realized he was trying to unlock the door. "Tom!" I shouted, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" The noise stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then his voice came, low and unsettling. "I just want to talk," he said. "You don't have to be afraid of me." I backed away from the door, clutching my phone and ready to dial 911. "Leave me alone, Tom," I said, my voice stronger this time. There was a long pause, and then the sound of footsteps retreating again. But I knew this wasn't over. My hands shook as I pulled up my dad's number. I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. Before I could overthink it, I hit call. The phone rang once, twice, and then went to voicemail. "Dad," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I need you to come back. Please, call me as soon as you get this." I ended the call, my heart sinking as the realization hit me. I was on my own tonight. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. Every muscle in my body was tense as I sat on the bed, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My dad hadn't called back, and my message felt like a tiny thread of hope dangling over a chasm of fear. The footsteps returned, softer this time, almost hesitant. My stomach churned as I heard them stop outside my door again. "Look, I'm sorry if I scared you," Tom said, his voice muffled but clear. "I didn't mean to." I stayed silent, my hand gripping my phone tightly. My instincts screamed at me not to respond. I don't want things to be weird between us," he continued, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "You're important to me. More than you realize." My breath hitched. Those words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't want to hear any more, but I was frozen, unable to move or speak. "I've always cared about you," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You're special. Not just because of your dad. You're different." My hands trembled as I tried to think of what to do. Should I yell? Call someone? My mind raced, but no clear answer came. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice now a whisper. "No," I shouted, finally finding my voice. "Tom, stop this. Go back downstairs." The sudden firmness in my tone seemed to catch him off guard. There was a pause, and then I heard a soft chuckle, low and unsettling. "All right," he said, his tone unreadable. "If that's what you want." I listened as his footsteps retreated down the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest, and I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. But I knew I couldn't just sit here, waiting for him to try again. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through my contacts, searching for someone I could call. My mom. No, she was hours away and would panic. The police? It felt extreme, but maybe that was the only option. Before I could make a decision, I heard a soft noise, like the creak of a door opening. I strained my ears, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound was faint but distinct, and it was coming from downstairs. I got up slowly, my heart pounding as I crept toward the window. Peering out, I looked for any sign of movement, but the street was dark and empty. I turned back to the room, feeling trapped and desperate. I couldn't stay here. That much was clear. I had to get out of the house. Quietly, I slipped on my shoes and grabbed my jacket, keeping my movements as silent as possible. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my body trembling with fear. I unlocked the door slowly, the soft click sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway, the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I had to make it to the front door. I just needed to get out. But as I took the first step, I heard his voice again, this time from the bottom of the stairs. "Going somewhere?" My heart nearly stopped at the sound of his voice. Tom stood at the base of the stairs, his silhouette barely illuminated by the faint glow of the living room light. He leaned casually against the railing, but there was something predatory in the way he watched me. I just needed some air," I stammered, gripping the banister to steady myself. My mind raced for a way out, but every option seemed impossible. "At this hour?" he asked, his tone deceptively light, but his eyes told a different story. "It's not safe out there. You should stay here where it's comfortable." He started up the stairs, slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the suffocating silence. I backed away instinctively, retreating toward the guest room. "I'm fine, really," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need to be alone." "Alone?" he repeated, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "That's a shame. I thought we were finally starting to connect." I felt my throat tighten as I edged closer to the door, my hand fumbling for the knob behind me. "Tom, please go back downstairs," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound firm. He didn't stop. "Why are you so tense?" he asked, his tone soft but unnervingly intimate. "You don't have to be. I just want to talk." With a burst of courage, I slipped into the room and slammed the door shut, locking it in one swift motion. My hands shook as I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. "Come on," he said from the other side, his voice calm but insistent. "You're acting like I'm some kind of monster. I'm not going to hurt you." I didn't respond, too afraid that my voice would betray the panic surging through me. "Fine," he said after a long pause, his tone suddenly cold. "If you want to be childish about this, I'll leave you alone. But don't forget, this is my house." I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, but I didn't feel any relief. His words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of how vulnerable I was. I couldn't stay here, not another minute. I needed to leave no matter what. I grabbed my phone and opened the map, looking for the nearest place I could go. A gas station, a diner, anything. But the nearest location was miles away, and I had no way to get there. A sound from outside the window caught my attention, a low rumble, like the engine of a car passing by. I rushed to the window, my heart leaping at the sight of headlights in the distance. It was a long shot, but maybe I could flag someone down, find help. I pushed the window open, the cool night air rushing in. I was halfway out when I heard a voice behind me. "You're really determined to get away, aren't you?" I whipped around to see Tom standing in the doorway, his expression dark and unreadable. The door lock dangled uselessly from his hand. My heart dropped as I saw him standing there, blocking the doorway, the broken lock in his hand. I froze, half out the window, my breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to do something, but I couldn't. "You didn't really think a little lock would stop me, did you?" Tom said, his voice low and cold. His eyes narrowed as he took a step closer, tossing the broken lock onto the floor. "Please, Tom," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Just let me go." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering my words. "Go where? It's the middle of the night. You don't even know anyone around here." "I'll find somewhere," I said, forcing myself to sound braver than I felt. "Just please." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, as if frustrated. "You're making this harder than it has to be," he said. "I told you I just want to talk. You're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't believe him. Not for a second. The way he was looking at me, the way he'd been acting all night, it was clear this wasn't about talking. I slowly pulled myself back into the room, keeping my eyes on him. My phone was still in my pocket, and I prayed that the signal here was strong enough to make a call if I needed to. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you let me leave now, I won't say anything to anyone. I promise." His expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought he was going to lunge at me. But then he laughed, a low, unsettling sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're scared of me," he said, almost amused. "You think I'm some kind of predator." I didn't answer, too afraid of saying the wrong thing. "That's not fair," he continued, stepping closer. "After everything I've done for you and your dad, you think I'd hurt you?" He was close now, too close. I backed up until I hit the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Tom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I flinched, but he didn't stop. "You're beautiful, you know that?" he said softly, his tone almost tender. My stomach churned, and I felt like I might throw up. "Stop," I said, my voice shaking. His hand dropped, and for a moment I thought he might actually back off. But then he stepped even closer, his breath warm against my face. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice a whisper. "I'd never hurt you. I care about you. More than you realize." I couldn't take it anymore. My hand shot to my pocket, pulling out my phone. I pressed the emergency call button, and the sharp sound of the automated voice filled the room. "Calling emergency services," the phone announced. Tom froze, his eyes darting to the phone in my hand. His expression shifted from shock to anger in an instant. "What are you doing?" he hissed, grabbing for the phone. I stumbled back, holding the phone out of his reach. "Stay away from me," I shouted, my voice breaking. But he didn't stop. He lunged forward, and I turned, sprinting toward the window. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know if I'd make it. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't staying here another second. I didn't think, I just acted. I dove out of the window, landing hard on the grass below. Pain shot through my knees, but I didn't stop. My adrenaline was pumping, and I scrambled to my feet, clutching my phone tightly as I sprinted away from the house. Behind me, I heard Tom shouting, "Come back here." His voice was sharp, furious, and closer than I expected. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him climbing out of the window, his movements frantic. The sight sent another surge of fear through me, and I pushed myself to run faster. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the neatly trimmed lawns and darkened houses offering no sign of help. My only thought was to get as far away from him as possible. The soft glow of a street lamp in the distance became my target. I reached the edge of the neighborhood, panting and shaking, and ducked behind a parked car. My hands trembled as I pulled up my phone. The screen cracked from the fall, but still functional. The emergency call was still connected, and a calm voice came through the line. 911, what's your emergency? I gasped for breath, struggling to form words. Someone's after me, I finally managed to say. He's trying to hurt me. The operator's voice remained steady. Where are you? Can you describe your location? I looked around, trying to find something. Anything that would help them find me. I'm in a neighborhood, near Elmwood Avenue, I think, I said, my voice shaking. Stay on the line with me, the operator said. Officers are on their way. Can you see him? I peered over the hood of the car, scanning the area. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I caught a glimpse of movement. Tom was walking down the street, his head swiveling as he searched for me. He's looking for me, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Stay hidden, the operator instructed. Help is coming. Just stay where you are and stay quiet. I crouched lower, pressing myself against the car, praying that he wouldn't see me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat feeling like a countdown. The sound of his footsteps grew louder as he came closer. My mind raced with options, but there was nowhere else to go. I could only hope he wouldn't think to look behind the car. You can't hide forever, Tom called out, his voice echoing in the still night. Come on, let's just talk. You're making this worse than it has to be. I bit my lip, trying to keep my breathing as quiet as possible. My hands gripped the phone tightly, the operator's calm voice a lifeline in the chaos. He's right near me, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Please hurry. Just as his footsteps stopped a few feet away, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Relief washed over me, but I didn't dare move. Tom turned toward the sound, his body stiffening. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. I stayed frozen as the flashing lights of a police car appeared at the end of the street. Tom hesitated for a moment, then turned and started walking away, his steps quick and purposeful. He's leaving, I whispered to the operator. Stay where you are, she said. Officers are almost there. They'll make sure you're safe. The sirens grew louder, and within seconds, a patrol car pulled up beside me. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Are you okay? One of them asked, his tone calm but urgent. I nodded, my body still trembling. He went that way, I said, pointing down the street where Tom had disappeared. The officers exchanged a quick glance before one of them gestured for me to get into the car. We'll take care of it, he said. Let's get you somewhere safe. I climbed into the back seat, the weight of the night finally catching up to me. As the car pulled away, I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the tears flow freely. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The ride to the station was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tom's face, his cold, calculating stare. One of the officers glanced back at me. You're safe now, he said, his tone kind but firm. We'll make sure of it. I nodded, though the knot in my chest didn't loosen. Thank you, I whispered, my voice barely audible. When we arrived at the station, they led me to a small room with neutral walls and a sturdy table. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a harsh glow that made the room feel even colder. A female officer joined us, her demeanor calm and reassuring. Take your time, she said, sliding a cup of water across the table to me. Can you tell us what happened tonight? I hesitated, my throat dry. Where could I even start? The events of the night felt like a blur, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was staying at my dad's friend's house, I began, my voice shaky. He's been close to my family for years. My dad trusts him. The officer nodded, encouraging me to continue. At first, it was normal, I said, the words tumbling out now. But then he started acting strange, saying things that didn't feel right. And then my voice broke, and I took a shaky breath. He wouldn't leave me alone. He tried to unlock my door. He said things that scared me. I stopped, swallowing hard, and looked down at my hands. The female officer leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. You did the right thing by calling us, she said. Do you know where he might be now? I shook my head. He ran when he heard the sirens. The officers exchanged a glance, and one of them left the room, likely to organize a search. What's his name? The female officer asked. Tom, I said. Tom Miller. She jotted something down on her notepad. We'll find him, she assured me. But for now, you're safe. Is there someone we can call for you? Your dad, maybe? I hesitated, then nodded. My dad, I said. He's out of town, but he needs to know. The officer handed me her phone, and I dialed my dad's number with trembling fingers. The line rang twice before he picked up. Hello. His voice was groggy, confused. Dad, I said, my voice breaking. Sweetheart? What's wrong? He asked, instantly alert. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. It's Tom, I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. He tried to. He scared me, Dad. I had to call the police. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then my dad's voice came, low and filled with anger. Where are you? At the police station, I said. They're looking for him now. I'm coming, he said firmly. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. The call ended, and I handed the phone back to the officer, my hands still shaking. He'll be here soon, I said softly. She gave me a reassuring nod. You're doing great, she said. We'll take care of the rest. But even as she spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. Tom was out there, and I knew he wouldn't give up easily. The wait felt endless, each second stretching into an eternity. I sat in the small, cold room, my mind racing with fragments of the night, the fear, the tension, the way Tom's voice seemed to linger in my ears. Every sound from the station, a door opening, footsteps approaching, made me flinch. Finally, the door opened and my dad rushed in, his face pale and tight with worry. Are you okay? He asked, his voice thick with emotion as he pulled me into a tight hug. I broke down, the tears I'd been holding back spilling over. Dad, it was so scary, I whispered, my words muffled against his chest. I didn't know what to do. You're safe now, he said firmly, his arms tightening around me. No one is going to hurt you. Not him, not anyone. The officer stepped in, giving us a moment before addressing my dad. We've sent out a team to locate Mr. Miller, she said. Based on the information your daughter provided, we're confident we'll find him soon. My dad nodded, his jaw clenched. When you do, I want to be notified immediately. The officer assured him they would, then excused herself, leaving us alone. My dad guided me to a chair, kneeling in front of me. His eyes, usually calm and composed, were filled with a storm of emotions, anger, guilt, and a deep sadness. I trusted him, he said, his voice cracking. I trusted him to keep you safe. It's not your fault, I said quickly, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. You couldn't have known. He shook his head, his hands gripping mine. I should have been there. I should have known something was wrong. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the night pressing down on us. It wasn't until another officer came in that we were pulled back to reality. We've located him, she said. He's in custody. Relief flooded through me, but it was mixed with a lingering unease. Even with Tom behind bars, the events of the night would stay with me. I knew that much. My dad stood, his expression hardening. What happens next? He asked the officer. He'll be processed and held for questioning, she replied. We'll need a formal statement from your daughter, but that can wait until she's ready. My dad nodded, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. We'll do whatever it takes. As we left the station, the cool night air hit me, and I realized how exhausted I was. My dad guided me to his car, his presence a steadying force after everything that had happened. From now on, no one stays in your life unless I know exactly who they are, he said as we drove. I'm never letting this happen again. I didn't argue. I was too tired, too drained, but his words gave me a small sense of comfort. For the first time that night, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd be okay. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me and helps me share more stories like this. Let me know your thoughts below. What would you have done in my situation? Stay tuned for more compelling tales in the future. Thank you for watching.